I know the other two of my colleagues here will be delighted to take shots at that philosophy, but the fact is, we will find in the next decade health insurance is increasingly out of the reach of most Minnesotans, and the cost of health care, even with insurance and certainly without it, is increasingly so, and that becomes an economic burden on business that's a real job stifler.
Thank you, Mr. Horner. Your thoughts on costs and predictability?
Absolutely. And Senator, I will oblige you. I don't think single-payer system is the way to go. I don't think a government-run system is the way to go. But I also don't think that turning it over to charity care is the way to go. Minnesota does have a good system, but we do need to recognize that if we don't make investments in health care, the cost doesn't go away. It's a tax on all of you, a tax on businesses, a tax on individuals, a tax on the property if you live in Hennepin and have to pay for HCMC as a result of the horrendous decisions made by the legislature this year. It's a tax that we pay. We've got to figure this out. And I think we do a couple of things. And again, you will see all of this in specific detail in my budget at horner2010.com. And so a couple of things. First, we need to invest in prevention. We need to make people healthier and help them be healthier and hold them accountable for their own personal health behaviors. Some of it is around investment in what communities can do. Some of it is good public policy. In my budget, I do suggest that we increase the tobacco tax. There is no good public policy that supports cheap cigarettes. Tobacco costs $2 billion a year in excess medical costs. We ought to encourage people to quit, particularly when we have state-of-the-art cessation programs. We need to invest in older adult services. Start making that transition to an older population today before the crisis is upon us. And that's in my budget. We do need to take the early opt-in to Medicaid. It will be $140 million. That's in my budget. Because only when we get more people covered can we do true reform. And ultimately, true reform is going to come down to personal responsibility, manage chronic care. When 5% of the population consumes 50% of the cost, we have to manage that. And we have to drive quality over outcomes, hold the whole system accountable. But ultimately, one of the things that people don't look at is we need to understand better where the costs are and then hold everybody accountable for driving change and reform quicker.
Thank you, Mr. Horner. Representative Emmer.
Well, there is a distinct difference. On the one hand, you have the politics as usual thing that we've had in Minnesota. We got great people. This has got nothing to do with what party you represent. It has to do with whether you have a belief that people can be responsible for themselves and if given the right choices are able to make those decisions on their own, or if government's got to take care of all of us. I mean, we talk about a government health care plan. There is nothing that government does better than we do in the private sector when given the opportunity, when government gets out of the way. And then we talk about creating a system where government's going to tell people how they should be healthy. I think when we talk about what we're doing going forward, well-meaning people in this state back in the early 70s tried to take a great health care system and make it better. We aren't going to point fingers. We just have to realize that 3 decades later, it's not going to be the answer for the long term in the state of Minnesota. When it comes to where we're headed in this state, we have got to look at putting people back in charge of their own health care decisions. Obamacare, as it's been called, the government system that's been promoted for the next legislature, next governor, is going to be an issue. Absolutely. It's frozen hiring at a lot of businesses that don't realize or don't understand quite yet how it's going to impact them. Reality, we may not have enough money to put it all into place, and we don't have the infrastructure. Government doesn't have the infrastructure to do it. So the next governor better lead. And you lead by giving people more choices. We should allow people to make choices as to what their coverage is going to be. We should empower them to shop one of the 1,300 health insurance products all across this country. And we should give individuals the same right to deduct their health care insurance premiums that right now we only give to employers. You do these things, and not only are we able to celebrate the 90 to 94% of people in this state that do have access to health insurance, but you will drive costs down by creating more choice, giving people more real responsibility over themselves. That's where we need to head.
Thank you, Representative Emmer. Tom Horner's request is 1-minute rebuttal.
Yes, so I just want to point out, Representative Emmer, that choices are meaningless when people can't exercise those choices. The program for low income, for the most vulnerable Minnesotans, GAMC, that you passed this year, is dealing with people who have incomes of $8,000 or less and assets of $1,000 or less. When you say to them, oh, just go into the private market and don't worry, we're going to make that private market bigger by bringing in a lot of insurers, that's no choice. When you say to them, just go to hospitals and they'll take care of you, that's no choice. That's an unfunded mandate that falls on the people in this room. In higher insurance premiums, in higher property taxes in Hennepin County, in higher medical costs that all of us pay out of pocket. You got to be real. You have to have the leadership to stand up to these issues and say, here's a vision, here's the budget, we'll make the tough choices and get it done. Not through rhetoric, but by bringing people together and finding good answers.
Representative Emmer, your 1 minute rebuttal.
You know, it's interesting when you get into these situations, the rancor, the aggressiveness. I'll just tell you what I do believe. We had, in the last biennium, roughly 40,000 people that were running at $400 million for the state of Minnesota. They are the poorest of the poor. They suffer from all kinds of terrible afflictions, chemical dependency, chronic illness. We couldn't sustain that, and we want to provide some type of safety net. No, I would agree that the solution that was passed in the legislature in the last session was not the ultimate answer, and it will be revisited come next legislative session. What's the answer? I believe the answer going forward is let's get government out of the business of brokering charity. Let's allow the clinics, the hospitals, the doctors of this state who want to provide that care, give them the ability to keep more of their hard-earned income by providing the care that's necessary to this population. Let's take government out of that picture and let's incent people to do what they already want to do.
Thank you. Next question relates to education reform and workforce development. And I should have mentioned earlier that the questions today were derived from TwinWest Business Agenda. It's a policy document we have at the TwinWest Chamber that you're welcome to check out online, candidates. This question actually, though, was submitted by one of our members, the Wayzata Public Schools Legislative Action Committee. The strength of the E through 12 education system is vital to the state's future economic growth and development. Minnesota, like most states around the country, is experiencing an academic achievement gap between certain ethnic and socioeconomic groups. From a workforce development perspective, we know it's critical to have students proficient in basic skills and, better yet, well acclimated to science, technology, engineering, and math. The question is, what changes to the state's E through 12 education system would you advocate in order to meet the learning needs of all students, and how does education reform fit into your plan? We'll start out with Tom Horner.
Well, thank you, and I would expand that a little bit. I don't think it's just E through 12. I think it's E through forever. And we need to be thinking about education as a seamless system from cradle to grave. People are going to need lifelong learning today. They're going to need the opportunity to refresh their skills, to develop new skills, to learn new trades in the economy that's going to exist. And we need to make that investment. And again, when you look at my budget, there are specific dollars set aside for all of these things that I'm going to talk about. So first of all, look at the opportunity we have next year with a new chancellor of MnSCU, a new president of the university, a new governor, to have a statewide conversation on what do we want out of higher education in this state, and put everything on the table. The alignment, the systems, the bricks and mortar, and make decisions, because we need strong vo-tech schools, we need strong community colleges, we need strong four-year institutions. But you start with outcomes. And the outcome we need in Minnesota are more Minnesotans with some level of post-high school education. You know, we have right now about 40% who have some kind of two-year or four-year graduate degree. We need to bump that up to 60%. We need to make sure that in our communities around the state that their community colleges, vo-techs, are tied to the regional economic assets that they have in their area so that they can grow and flourish. But when you back it all up, you see, we can't afford a high school graduation rate that is 60% and falling among some of our communities. So that backs us up to say we need to make an investment in early learning. Not just lip service to it, but money, real money, even in a $6 billion shortfall. We need to invest in early learning. We need to invest in reform. We need to make sure that the Education Minnesota rules on seniority are not the rules that determine whether or not we can have innovative programs in our schools around the state. We need to put teachers in charge of the schools. We need to make sure we have great principals who are running the schools and working with the teachers so that we can close the achievement gap, improve the quality of education, and get more value for every dollar we spend.
Thank you. Same question to you, Tom Emmer.
Those are good points, and I think I would go a little farther when we talk about our education system. We have great students, and we have a lot to be proud of in the state of Minnesota, but we've got a lot of work to do, too. Our children are no longer compared with Wisconsin, Iowa, North and South Dakota. They're being compared internationally. And whether we like it or not, our children internationally are falling in the middle of the pack. It's not about just throwing more money at it. It's about where we put those investments. And I do believe in early childhood investments. We've got a lot of money going there already. It's just not focused in terms of where should that money be spent? Where do you get the biggest bang for your buck? You know, New Horizon Academy is a great example. Some of you may be familiar with New Horizon. They opened up one of their academies on Rice Street in partnership with some local businesses, because businesses understand that we can do all the government redesign we want, we can create all the new jobs we want, but if we don't have the labor, the workforce to drive that new system, we won't succeed. So what they do, New Horizon tells me that it takes about 3 years to fill one of these academies. In this case on Rice Street, I'm told it was filled in 6 months, and there's a waiting list. We have not been succeeding when we attack the achievement gap in this state. It is unacceptable that a child in Battle Lake, for instance, gets $5,000 roughly under the state's formula, while a student in Minneapolis gets $15,000 or more. Plus, the results don't show that the more money we spend gets us the result we want. When you have a 4-year graduation rate in Minneapolis of less than 50%, clearly we're not doing the right things. Science shows that a child's brain is wired for learning before the age of 5. Let's be more focused on what we do with that 3- and 4-year-old level. Let's get those kids ready to compete when they get to the classroom. That will attack the achievement gap, and then let's make sure that we have the workforce that will drive our economy in the years to come.
Mark Dayton, how do we meet the needs of our students, and how does reform fit into your plans?
Well, we need to refund and we need to reform. We agree that early childhood education is vitally important, and it is. But in fact, Minnesota has been reducing its funding for early childhood education. And that's had the fact that we are one of the poorest states in the nation in terms of the participation of our 3- and 4-year-olds in these early childhood opportunities. And as a former Republican state senator leader, Dwayne Benson is working with Minnesota business partnership companies to find the best strategies and then to fund those. He's telling those businesses, many of you, that these are investments in your future workforce that are essential, again, for the long-term vitality of our state. I voted against No Child Left Behind in Washington. It's excessively burdensome testing. We test children now in Minnesota in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th, and 11th grades. There are even procedures for what to do with a 3rd or 4th grader is so anxious about the test that they throw up on the tests. That's what we're stressing kids out. We're preventing teachers from teaching for results that aren't available to the schools until after the end of the school year. And then comparing this year's 4th grade class with last year's 4th grade class, which is an invalid statistical comparison. Instead, we need to do individual, what they're doing in St. Croix School District or Lakeville. They're doing a 1-minute reading out loud diagnostic test in the first week of 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. They can determine which children are reading below grade level. If they have the resources, they can provide either individual or small group remedial work, and if that child stays in that school the whole year, in 85% of the cases, that child's reading above grade level by the end of the year. That's life transforming. We need to refund education because real student aid per pupil has been cut by the state by an average of $1,300 per student under Governor Pawlenty's 2 terms. And that means overcrowded classrooms. Also one of the principal reasons that property taxes have gone up all over the state, more than doubled in the last decade, in fact. We need to get rid of bad teachers. We need to get rid of bad principals. We need to look at our curriculum and make sure kids are prepared for the future. And I could go on, but I'm out of time.
Thank you, Senator.